To be, to become, to begin, where the river leans to the sea. To learn, to let go, to love. The world turns endless, turning me. Oh.
In this conversation, Jim and I map the Epiphany Axis, and we explore how to break the immune system of the self to reclaim agency in a civilization designed for extraction. We look at the three walls of Moloch, the planetary, the attentional, and the financial, and ask, how can we protect what is truly life-serving? It is time to move from being a subject of the system to being the agent that reshapes it. Let's begin.
All right, so we decided to tackle the Epiphany Axis. So the question of how can we deprogram from whatever's our current perspective on the world and therefore our actions and into something that is more attuned with what the world asks for right now, what the world needs. And there's a little anecdote that I heard from Jordan Hall around this, and that highlights the difficulty of this, which is the immune system of ourself, the immune system of our current worldview. He was in a conversation with a person and tried to describe to that person what does this transition look like, the whole transformation. And then after half an hour, 45 minutes of questions, the person was getting to a point where they understood it, and then they went full blank, back to zero, starting to ask him the same questions as 45 minutes ago. And that happened twice in that conversation. And the second time, Jordan actually noticed a dilation of the pupils. So there's maybe even a biophysical component to all of this, right? So what this is trying to say is it's really deep, right? We really have to rebuild the way we look at the world quite consciously, and that's an extremely hard task to do. So, which has a lot to do with what some people call waking up, or what might be end up in the question of is there free will, right? So can we actually create a loop over which we reshape the way we will into the world? So, with that frame, let's hit
hop
it,
into it.
Jim.
Yeah. Let's start with the free will question, because actually that's pretty neat. But we could spend 2 hours just talking about that. My position is at a minimum as if free will, and my intuitions tell me that when we fully understand emergence, we will see that there is indeed room for real free will. But it doesn't really matter for this question. We have something that is very much as if free will at the scale, at this meso scale that we live in. Whether it's true down at the atomic scale, I don't know. And I do care, but that's work for the scientists of the future around emergence. And so that then leads to what I've called on more than one occasion the gateway to game B or other radical system changes. It's really simple, which is to fundamentally first realize and then feel that all this stuff out here was invented by humans, right? And can be changed by humans. Moses didn't come down from Mount Sinai with the description of the Federal Reserve System and fractional reserve banking on it, right? This is something humans have created a bit at a time, frozen accidents, sometimes consciously. And every single thing that we both love and hate about our society was created by a human or a group of humans or a collective action decision, and hence can be changed. And now, it is true that one should be somewhat conservative on changing things that have lasted a long time, the so-called Chesterton's fence idea, that before you tear down a fence, it's best to understand why it's there. But that doesn't mean you can't tear down the fence. And I'm convinced that most people walk through their lives just taking their life as given, right? That they are a subject, not an object in the game. And I had some experiences relatively early on in my life which convinced me that being an object was possible. And even at a young age, I would describe the world as being made of butter, right? Which is that, yes, there's structure there, but if you lean on it, you can get it to move, or you can melt it a little bit, you can carve a new hole through it, etc. And I would say that that was, probably 22 or 23 when I had that insight. The world was structured, but it was made of butter. And that was an extraordinarily important and powerful perspective. And I'm not quite sure how people can do that, but probably making small changes. So I can make a change, right? I don't have to keep doing this. One I currently recommend to people is absolutely do not watch any TV that has advertising in it. Right? Sign up for streaming services, pay the extra $3 a month to not get the ads. Particularly broadcast TV ads are hugely persuasive in building your value model internally, et cetera. And so just getting rid of that heartbeat by itself is relatively significant. Another one I personally do is, as you know, is I sign off from social media for 6 months of the year. That's probably not possible for a lot of people because they have so much of their, personal and professional life tied up in it. But I will say it's been a good thing for me to get away from that chitter chatter noise. And then when I go back, which by the way, I have not gone back this time, which is interesting. My 6 months is up and I have not logged back on to any of the social media. But when I do go back, it's like same shit, different day, right? There's not a damn thing different than it was 6 months ago. Maybe the topic of blather is there. So anyway, the first step is to realize that the world is butter, and maybe the butter is frozen, but it can be changed. And then the second step is to realize that you can't do it by yourself, right? Or you can only you can do like entrepreneurial things, right? You can start a little business, you can build a house, you can find a spouse, you can start a family. So there's a lot of things you can do yourself, and you can do them with awareness and aware that you are building something. But to produce larger scale change is going to require many people to go through this change, and that we really can't do it alone. And that further, as we found watching people try to do it alone, you can go off for your 42-day retreat and make some big personal changes, come back, go to work in the cubicle farm for the insurance company. And 6 months later, you're almost back to where you were before in many cases. And so being linked into communities of people who share similar values is really important. The old Game B saying, find the others is the first thing to do. Is find people in your local community, find people in the wider world that you resonate with, and that you have some reasonable alignment on what you think would be a better world than the one we live in. It's so much easier when you can talk to other people about this than when you just talk to yourself. There was probably a 3-year period when I was just thinking about this stuff totally to myself. And only as I started to reach out to other people did the quality of my thinking actually start to improve. And then the third one, and this is one that really tipped me into a trajectory towards what eventually became Game B, but at the time it had quite different valence, what is the understanding of limits that, essay I'm currently working on. I talk about the fact that in 1700, plus or minus the beginning of Game A in its current flavor, the world's population was 625 million. Each human consumed about 1/10 as much energy and material as contemporary average humans across the whole Earth do. Do the math, and you're at about less than 1% of the imposition on the Earth. Run forward 325 years, and we're at 8 billion, headed for 10 or 11 billion probably. Each one of us doing 10 times at least, and many people in the world wanting American or European style lifestyles. If everybody did that, we'd be at 30 or 40 times the imposition on the Earth. And just one number tells us how close we must be to the edge of sustainability, just purely due to scale. And that is more than 80% of the weight of all birds on Earth are human poultry. That's crazy, right? How much more room can there be? Not much. And yet we continue to act in many ways as if that were not the case. So, first understand that all the social systems that we both like and don't like were created by humans, can be created by others, that we need to do it together to actually make anything happen, and that the forcing function right now is that we are at lots of different limits. I'll give you another limit. And this is one that I think might bite us in the ass before the climate and ecological limits do. And that is our attentional limits, right? Humans evolved to pay attention a certain number of times a day to significant things. And, if you're living in a state of nature, there's some fairly high stake things that happen from time to time, and you're constantly looking for snakes and, whatever. And so, yeah, you are using a fair bit of attention. But our evolved info system is banging us with thousands of attentional messages a day, whether they're ads, billboards, scrolling TikToks, pop-ups. How many goddamn pop-ups do we get exposed to a day? Each one is an attempt at information hijacking. And I'm fairly convinced that a fair bit, maybe the majority of the craziness of our current politics, our current conspiracy theories, our inability to come together and to make sense collectively is not even so much the bad content we're getting. It's just the number of interrupts that are hitting us every day have basically depleted our ability to focus and to make decisions. And so there's another example of a limit, right? When the limit of communications was newspapers, the amount of interrupts a day you could get from the infosphere, was basically, say, newspapers and U.S. mail, regular postal mail, wherever you happen to live. Only a certain number of messages came in a day, right? And you could easily modulate how many messages that you dealt with. Today, in our electronic infosphere, if you're not careful, you can grossly oversaturate the human capacity for human interrupts. And so understanding that as another one of these limits that are evolved game A, driven by its money on money return, has produced. And so when you start to understand the concepts of limits and how close we are in many different dimensions, just another one, debt. Our system is designed to increase debt exponentially. And it has, and it does, and it's to a degree that really bad things could happen, at least within the definitions of game A finance, because of exponential growth of debt. So you realize that we're pretty damn close to the edge in many, and maybe over the edge in many things. I would say we're probably over the edge in interrupts, and we're over the edge in some of the planetary limits, and there's going to be hell to pay. And so those three things strike me as the steps one needs to go to break out of being a subject and to be able to become an object in the world.
And that frame for me, the red thread to all of that is agency that I notice here. So what you assign as the object is an object, not a subject, because it has agency. And the agency, or the question of how do you evolve agency in a world that really doesn't need you to have agency, right? The system, without assigning any deliberation to this, but it's an emergent system that came out of history with some frozen errors, and now we're just part of that. And that system doesn't need us to be agentic in any way. It wants us to play a given part so that it can continue and grow. And so the question is, how do you evolve agency in such a situation? And the way I'm hearing you is that it's a combination between reaching out, so observing big arcs, and then not being overwhelmed by those big arcs, but developing local agency that can help us really deeply embrace and understand those big arcs and our role in it, so that our agency can grow over time. And I think that in there's a tipping point in which you move your agency from deciding that it is a good idea to bank with this bank, not with the other, because they are more conscious about what they do with the money, or going to this grocery store instead of the other because they source locally, all the way to, okay, we can actually co-shape the way we live together as a civilization. So what would be a good starting point for somebody who sees the challenge, the big observation, right, which is hard to overlook at this point, but doesn't know how to ratchet up towards this tipping point where you can actually understand, okay, we can flip it together. What's a solid first step?
Very interesting question, and I've come around to the view that it probably has to be collective action to stick. And so first find a few other people and meet with them regularly and discuss these things and choose some actions together, reinforce each other, check in regularly. As I suspect that most folks, particularly if they've been programmed for a long time to just follow their nose through life, right? Just, as you say, have no agency or very little agency. They have everybody has some agency. But with respect to changing how you live, it's hard. And so I think doing it, you can try to do it individually, and that may get you brain primed a little bit for it. But producing membranes, as I call them, of groups of people who have chosen in some way to mark off that they are different. And it may just be, as you say, we all agree to not shop at this grocery store and shop at this grocery store instead, and not to watch TV with ads in it, and just a few things. It may just be a very small number of agreements that we do together, and we talk about how we are reacting to those together, and maybe we slowly add agreements, and we bring new people into our membrane, and I think that is how we can potentially grow to the tipping point, is as membranes that get bigger, get richer, grow horizontally, interpenetrate each other. So you may be a member of your local acting better membrane, but you're also a member of the, let's say, infosphere shepherding membrane. So you can be member of multiple membranes. And until we can get this propagation of membranes, it's going to be difficult.
That's part of the conversation we've had about the personal institutional spiral, right? So ratcheting up through that. But even before that, before you have this need to find the others, and then feel a little bit stronger because you formed a group around some weird behavior that you started, like going to that grocery store and not the other. You have to start that behavior, right? And I find that it can start in very, 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 very small ways. Like, I don't know, fix a thing that you thought couldn't be fixed, right? Or that you thought you couldn't fix. That is a real first step into agency, where you understand out of that process that the interconnectedness of everything, right? So you try to fix this thing, you need some other things, you see how difficult or impossible it might be to get those things, and then you try to understand why it is so difficult, and then something bigger starts emerging that really gives you a deep understanding of the systemic embedding of that little toaster that you just tried to fix and can't because you need some proprietary computer interface that you can see what's wrong with the thing. Like I had this experience with my older kids, which was we decided to stop using single-use plastic. And really tracking across our life, where do we use single-use plastic? How can we replace that behavior with something else? And then discover that in some instances, it's actually really, really hard. So if you want to go to a conventional supermarket and so you want to give them your packaging for whatever, if you want to buy some cheese, they won't let you do that because it might be contaminated, so they cannot even touch it, right? So you have to find protocols with them so they don't have to touch it if they're open, right? Most of them aren't. But then find those limitations and understand them and dig deeper into that and find potential solutions to those limitations, or start making the things yourself, right? At the time, Noah was, I don't know, 7. Noah really loved gnocchi. And the only freshly made gnocchi we could find came once a week, and that was like not always fitting our schedule. So we had to learn how to make gnocchi ourselves, which is incredibly tasty and super rewarding. And then we started doing other things ourselves. And then out of that emerged a new layer of agency that ultimately helped us review the world, literally.
Notice you were doing it as a group, which provides a certain kind of reinforcement that trying to do it by yourself sometimes lacks.
But sometimes a group doesn't have to be large, right? A micro accountability,
3 or 4.
or 2, right? Micro accountability already might suffice, right? It's just one other person who holds you accountable.
And also as a balancing force, so that you come up with a reasonable trade-off, right? By oneself, I can at least tend to be fairly extreme. But if I have to talk somebody else into something, then we have to come into some form of agreement on what's reasonable for 2 people to do. Now, I always talk about that for entrepreneurhood. Don't be a sucker for your own ideas. Recruit other people in as early as possible, even if it's on a volunteer basis, to challenge your ideas and to get you to think about something that's really practical rather than be polarized around one's own thinking. Very important to think together.
Which leads to another really important point, because we can see that sense of agency also going completely haywire in the case of some entrepreneurs, right? If you reach escape velocity with your own agentic power, and you could do almost anything in the world you want to, and your trajectory is off by just a few degrees, then you will run everybody into a deeper shit show than we already are in. So this means that seeking out the collective as a corrective for your agency early on is probably a clever thing to do for yourself and others.
Yeah, one could see that as a road forward, where if we did have enough of these membranes, and then, entrepreneurs, at least some of them, were members of these membranes, then they would form their companies and operate their companies in accordance with whatever membrane they belong to. And that, assuming the membranes had good values, would bend the trajectories of these companies at least a bit, maybe a lot.
I think it does something. It does something else because if I continue that thread of agency, let's take somebody like I don't know, he's overused in these examples, but I'm still going to use him. Elon Musk. He's probably shit scared of life, so he needs to create all of these abstracted layers of security around himself in the form of a lot of money and power, so that he doesn't have to be that shit scared. But there's a different way of dealing with your fear of life, right? If you know that you have agency and you can build things, then you also know that whatever life throws at you, you can rebuild. And with that knowledge, with that confidence, you look at the world in an entirely different way, with less need for exploitation. Do you think that's possible?
It's a big gap there. To go from the personal ability to rebuild to something like security. It's true to a degree.
Yeah.
I've never been afraid of being fired, for instance, because I knew I could always get another job, and probably at higher pay than I was making when I was younger. I was very confident in my abilities, but not everybody has those abilities. I think the stronger route, but it takes longer, is that when the structure of membranes gets deeper, it becomes real community that can become mutual aid networks. And it's at that point where I think that more people can become liberated to be agentful. When, if you personally fail, you will be taken care of by your network until you get back on your feet. And that your sustenance is really the responsibility of your mesoscale network rather than yourself. And that will produce a fundamental change, I believe, in how people think about their interactions in the world.
Okay, so somebody who hasn't seen or doesn't see the world in the same way you do would say, oh, you're a socialist. You want the collective to carry us all. How would you counter that in that scenario? Because it's a limited perspective. No, that.
Yeah, it's a very I think custom tuning job. I think we've learned that pure collectivism doesn't work very well. On the other hand, we've also learned that radical individualism, well, it works well in some degrees, does not appear to provide us what we actually want. And so the tuning between the two is, I think, artful. And exactly what that tuning looks like, I'm not 100% sure. There should be a number of experiments done with it. The Israeli kibbutzes is an interesting group of found experiments. There's still about 20% that are radically shared purse and hardcore egalitarian, but most of them have moved away from that. And the question is, how far? What's optimal? When does the security aspects of collectivism not become a hammock where people can just lay back and not play their part? And in fact, in game theory, I just recently wrote an essay on a famous and deep problem, which will never be eliminated, it always has to be managed, is that in many, many cases, the good of the group comes from me cooperating with the group the good of me is to defect from the group and get the benefits of the group without putting in my own benefits, without putting in my own efforts. And this is a problem we see, in welfare state societies, for instance, where people who could work choose not to because they're on the dole, and they go, "Oh well, I'd rather be on the dole than have to work." Right? How do you create a culture where that doesn't happen, where there is but on the other hand, where someone is actually in need gets the aid of the network, and that's very subtle balancing.
And a constant rebalancing, which is, to me, potentially a symptom of that individual agency on the collective, right? So if everybody who's part of the collective knows that ultimately you have sufficient capacity to bootstrap your life again into something functioning if things start to fail, but you also know that this is easier and stronger if you do it as a collective and you hold both of these at the same time, then it's easier to rebalance as needed as an individual and as a collective continuously. So to me, the core still is in the individual potential for full independence and agency, and at the same time the acknowledgement of the dependence on everybody else around you.
Yeah, and the other thing that's true about particularly smaller scale collective aid, etc., is that it's not anonymous. Like a government check is anonymous, right? If you're getting support from your community of 150 or 200 or 300 people, you're embedded in a very high dimensional network of reciprocal altruism, basically, where the community has an incentive to help you get back on your feet, right, as a whole. And it's not just giving you a check until you decide to get off your ass or until the check runs out. If it's a rich community, it's going to say, Thomas, it would help if you took a bath once in a while. You scare your employers when you come in smelling terrible, right? And whatever it is that the community can help you overcome to keep you, to help you get back on your feet into the world, no longer be, a net burden on the society. Or, let's say it's a person who suffered some serious injury, and there really is some limit on what they can do. And so the community can find appropriate work for them. And maybe it doesn't cover 100% of their carrying costs. Maybe it covers 60%. So, the person works in the laundry as the best they can do, but the community has decided with them that this is the best they can do. So the fact that the community is high dimensional and in concert with the individual to make them as fit as they can be within the ecosystem and within their actual capability is a fundamentally different way of interacting than the way people interact with the government, for instance.
But if you bring it back to a really practical level, because that's the question, the axis of epiphany, not the further implementation of it, but where does that start? I think is at the very minimal level, form a micro accountability group with at least one other person and create something that you thought you couldn't. That would be my recipe, to create something that was outside of your scope of doing things, at least, right? And hold each other accountable for this. And out of this, there's a high probability of all of the needs and the deep understanding of what you're describing emerging, because what you're describing is only possible once you have really deeply understood that the entire set of necessary preconditions that what you're describing is actually a stronger model than the egoic exploitation model, right? And that is where the transition needs to occur. And I think the starting point is do something that you did not think you would be possible, and have somebody hold you accountable for it, and vice versa. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Then of course there's yeah. I think that's a place to start. I think that's a place to start.
Let's
I
find
think
others.
membranes could start. Yeah, they're. I think the co-housing is an example of relatively small membranes that can be started, where a group of people get together, rent a 7-bedroom house, and build a small membrane that includes some collective security in it, but probably it's too small to provide total collective security, and it increases the musculature for coming into agreement about how to live. And
Yeah, but it's
the
a
other
version of what I
alternative is
just
we
said, I
talked about a lot.
think, because you're finding a micro accountability group and you're doing something that's outside of your scope. Right? It's one
in this case
possible
something
implementation.
bigger. Right.
Yeah, it's bigger. It's bigger
And
than
another
going
one, which we
shopping
talked
somewhere
about
else.
last.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the intensity, I suppose you could even count the intensity of the flows, or, to what degree are, if you wanted to very just crude, you could build a game A equivalent, right? How much dollars is involved in this thing? And then the one we talked about last time, start a cooperative business, right? Start a business with the will from the beginning that it's going to be employee owned, that it's going to be more or less egalitarian, and that it is going to operate with a set of principles that we've all agreed upon. And then that could grow to considerable size. There are some co-ops in the world that are as big as publicly traded companies. Most of them aren't, but there's nothing in the cooperative form per se that keeps a co-op from growing. There's some things that make it more difficult, but that's another example. So basically doing things together with people as a membrane that distinguishes between what's inside and what's outside.
Mm-hmm.
And what's inside is what we think of as a better way to live.
And I think there's another quality that needs to be addressed, which is as you do all of this, you fully integrate an understanding of a system. And since we had in our conversation before we hit record here, you mentioned Tyson, and Tyson taught me something once in a similar conversation, which I think shows what I mean by that very, very nicely. And he said, if you want to be able to live in tune with an ecosystem, the way you start doing that is by following the water. And if you follow what the water does in an ecosystem, then you will slowly, what starts happening is you will start to understand the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all of the aspects of the ecosystem. Right? You will start seeing where the water gets drawn in order to feed some trees, but you will also see how that feeds birds, and then that starts unfolding the entire ecosystem. And in Tyson's image, you've reached full understanding of the ecosystem once the water accepts you. And the way he describes that is you step into the water and the life that's around you in the water doesn't flee because you smell like that ecosystem. You're part of it, literally, right? And so what is an effect of that agency is the slow unfolding of the full understanding of the ecosystemic embeddedness or the systemic embeddedness of yourself, right? Whether that's the co-housing project and that community of people, or whether that's the food systems that you're part of. Slowly you start seeing that full picture. And once there's a transition point where it becomes entirely obvious to behave in the way you're describing, in the, let's call it the infinite game policy rather than the finite game policy. It becomes obvious that that is the more powerful path, as you fully integrate the systemic complexity.
And here's, I think, a very hopeful sign is that while there's only a very small percentage of people who kind of get this so far, it's probably a couple of percent, so it's a big number in absolute terms. Once we have good examples that people can come and touch and feel and live in or experience, I suspect a considerably greater number of people will feel, wait a minute, this is fundamentally different and fundamentally better, and will get themselves to orient towards thinking about how they can do their own versions of these things. And that will also, of course,
But
include
I think that's
startup.
I think that's a different thing. That's a different thing. That's the desirability spiral that doesn't require you to fully move into agency, because that'll
True.
Yeah. So getting to critical mass requires. Yeah. Please go.
Yeah. I was going to say, one could imagine a attractiveness gradient that was not embedded in agency. So perhaps the counter to that is to pay some considerable attention to the dynamics of every membrane such that it helps build agency. Even if people say join a membrane because it feels good, the membrane itself has cultural rules which are conducive to building agency.
If that's needed, I think that's also a really important question. Ultimately, how much agency of that kind is really needed for the long-term balancing of the systems? Because agency also, while it's rewarding, it's also metabolically intense, right? And maybe it's not even something everybody should be engaging with. Maybe it's actually useful to have a balance between people who are pulled by desire and people who are setting up attractors through agency.
It is certainly true that in history, the vast preponderance of people seem to be willing to leave the agency to others. On the other hand, the concept of governance by the, only with the support of the people seems like a step in the right direction. So perhaps where these things come together is in the domain of governance, right? How much governance, what sort? We have things like representative democracy, we have direct democracy, we have liquid democracy. We have things like Forrest Landry's small group process, that it's kind of an interesting, weird combination. So over time, one could imagine our governance modalities converging towards some appropriate gradient of agency and non-agency that fits, one, human nature, and two, the current context.
Well, in my hope, I think it might be a much more fulfilling world if agency tends towards the whole, right? If everybody has that at least the potential to activate agency at any point, that would be, to me, a very desirable outcome. The question is might it be counterproductive, or would it actually be a step up in the way we do humanity? Right? If we managed to create conditions for all of us to be in agency, Or is it not possible at all? Right? Is the metabolic
I think that's
constraint just too large for all of us?
I think we don't know the answer to that. I suspect we can get considerably more agency than we have today. Question is, the governance modality, as I say often about membranes, it has to work, right? The failure mode, you see, one of the failure modes is the only managed by consensus, right? You get above 15, it's almost impossible to reach true consensus. And so organizations above 15 that try to operate on pure consensus never make any decisions. And so, and under consensus, everybody has agency. Anybody can block anything, right? And that is not realistic for larger entities, but may be appropriate for smaller entities. And so there's going to be an artfulness in balancing where agency exists and in what form and how it modulates to affordances of levers that can be pulled, etc. And so I think thinking about agency as a human capacity is very subtle. And I would say that we could take as a design principle that everything else being equal, which it never is, encouraging agency is good, but is not necessarily a unilateral good. And there may be lots of people that say, hey, I don't want to be dealing with the governance of this community. I will make my vote in my consensus group to appoint one of our members to the council, but I don't really want to get in there and debate how much of our budget goes for sewage treatment versus how much goes for growing spinach. Somebody else can deal with that.
Okay, you've been hiding some of the complexity in the term artfulness here in this conversation. What can you unpack what you mean by artfulness? Because I think there's a lot of richness in there that might be helpful for the full understanding.
Yeah, and again, this comes from this original thing we talked about of realizing these things are made by humans and we can change them. So there are, within the democratic style of governance, there are originally direct democracy, where everybody votes on everything, or everybody who cares to vote votes on everything. And then there's representative democracy. But there's also many other possibilities of governance modalities. Liquid democracy, one of my favorites, needs to be tried at scale to see if it really works. But it's interesting where you have a proxy that you can give to anybody else, right? So I don't want to vote on sewage treatment. You get my proxy for sewage treatment. And some people may choose to give all their voting away to people. Other people may choose to receive votes because they have expertise. And how that organizes as an information processing system is artful, I would say. In every case, the result of architectural decisions and cultural traditions will interact with the events of the world to produce either better or worse governance. And of course, it will be better or worse governance in different dimensions. It may be better in some and worse than others. And I would say there's no obvious right answer, that it is, and that's what I mean by artful, that it is inherently going to be subject to experimentation, trade-offs, debate, and should not be thought of as a static system. That's what I mean when I say artful.
Okay.
And yeah.
So dynamic rebalancing between opposing forces. So basically, when in a piece of art becomes interesting when it has when it has tension on many layers that are stacked, that creates unexpected perspectives, but is at the same time a coherent whole and fits into what into the or not the worldview of the person looking at it. So the artfulness is integration of complex signals and requirements into a coherent whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and a provisional one, right? Artists
Okay.
continue to create. And
Yeah. Okay.
I like the perspective of a whole. Yeah.
The
And what I
dynamism. I've
like
got the
about
dynamism.
your statement there,
Yeah. Please go.
is that presumably the artfulness should be observable by the constituents, right? That at any given time we have our settings for our governance. This is what we've agreed to govern, and we have the ability to change how we govern. And the near consensus, we'll never get consensus on any group bigger than 15, is that this is a pretty good, artful way to govern ourselves right now. It feels coherent. It feels right. Not to say that it's right for all time, but for the current circumstance we're in, we feel good about this design.
What would what would change if we replaced artful with joyful?
You had a little bit of a break up there.
What would change in all of this, in your perspective, if we replaced the term artful with the term joyful? What would be the difference in the expression of that?
Interesting question. Presumably, well, the question is joyful the right dimension to consider governance? Governance is the art of trade-offs, and trade-offs are always difficult and make some people unhappy. So I'm not 100% sure if joyfulness is even an appropriate design parameter for governance. Joyful governance might just be a contradiction in terms. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think that a joyful governance might mean?
Well, I keep falling back onto, what was it called? The Harvard concept. This idea of, or the set of ideas, this book around negotiation practices. And it had some very, very straightforward, clear examples of how to reframe situations so that there's no need for compromise, but there's actually almost always a way to really fulfill the needs and wants of everybody involved. And if that's a central premise, then joy becomes possible for all participants. And therefore, joy might be just the final destination, and which, because it's also linked to a deep individual insight, right? You can be more joyful even in the light of adversity if you are deeply grounded in your own humanness. So it reflects both the individual and the collective, and integrates it into one coherent thing. But maybe I'm just making shit up. I find it an interesting lens to look at, to look through, and it comes from our friends in Australia, which Tyson is part of, the Imagination crew, who managed to put joy into a funding contract with their government as a core metric. That's why I threw it into this conversation here.
You're breaking up big time. I'm going to try to switch to a different network. I'm having network problems recently. Let's see what happens.
Okay.
Switch.
But I think I have a hard one, unfortunately. And yeah, well, we still have.
All right, how's that?
We'll see. Okay.
See if that's better. Maybe on your end,
Okay.
it's getting pretty bad there.
Well, I can see my Starlink from here. It's all free and easy, but
So,
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
of course, you never know how many satellites you have in view, but there's so many of them now. You should probably have a few. So, so where were we talking about? Whether
joy.
joyfulness, whether joy and joyfulness is a good design parameter for governance. And I think I expressed a little skepticism. May just be a lack of richness of thinking about it. Or, it could be a second order design attribute that joyfulness is a good thing to have in the design attribute, but as a design attribute, but there are other considerations that are higher up the stack, such as shit has to work, right? But the governance overhead needs to be.
But maybe it's a design principle for the axis of Epiphany, right? Which is what we're trying to unpack here, because not feeling joyful about important elements of your life might be a signal that there are some questions to be asked that could help you move into agency, right? So finding out where are you on that axis of joyfulness could help you identify whether something needs to be done.
Still breaking up a lot. My guess it's on your end because I have this one I just switched to is pretty stable.
Okay. I don't have an alternative here at the moment, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, let me address this new formulation of joyfulness. I think this is actually more fruitful. I think a lot of people that are turning in our direction, even though it's still a couple of percent, it's a felt sense that something is wrong, right? That their lived experience, despite living in the richest civilization in the history of the world by a shitload, nonetheless is not fulfilling, is not rich. Feels like every day is a burden. That they are subjects, not objects. That they know that the road we're on is terminal, and so the pervasive lack, or at least weakness, in joyfulness amongst many people, particularly younger people. I find this much more in people under 35, is a significant part of the motivator for thinking about alternatives.
So that's another axis there, right? So really being truthful about your experience of the world, are you tending towards joyful or not? Might be a really, really helpful trigger to get you into that spiral of seeing more of the system,
You're
so
really
that you
breaking
can
up bad now.
become. Yeah. Okay. I suspect it's actually Riverside. It's none of our connections. But if it's so, there's no network I can change to. So let's maybe keep this for the starting of our next conversation. I'll stop the recording here.